Hello lovelies, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here and you want to know more about supernatural birth, then stay tuned because this is the video for you. I just want to say hi and welcome real quick. This interview that you're about to watch is actually my process of how I got from having a normal natural birth towards believing for a supernatural childbirth and how I achieved that for my last two births. So it's hosted by my friend Miriam Wathen on her podcast, which is called Doula Days. I will link her podcast down below. She has amazing stories from all different kinds of women, all different kinds of birth stories. So if you're into that kind of thing, definitely check her out. If you love anything to do with motherhood and homemaking or thrifting and or birth, you're in the right place, and I would love to have you hit the subscribe button and have you join the fam. I'm so grateful that you're here and you matter, you are important to me, and I am so grateful for you. I also want to say, if you are interested in having a supernatural birth or have heard about it and are intrigued by the idea, I want to let you know that I have started a Facebook group which also has to do with the topics of homemaking and motherhood, but I'll put the link down below in case you are interested in joining. I would love to chat with you and really hold your hand if you are wanting to explore more about supernatural childbirth. But without further ado, let's get into the stories and the nitty-gritty details. Nothing super gruesome, and I can't wait to share with you guys my story of how I came to have a supernatural childbirth. Well, hi Brittany, thank you so much. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good.
Good. Guys, we're here today with my friend Brittany, and today's a little bit different of a podcast episode, so it may sound a little different. We're here in person, and Brittany is a YouTuber, and so we're actually recording this for her YouTube channel as well as for the Doula Days podcast episode.
Yes.
So
we're looking two different directions and trying to be in the mic as well, so that's how we're doing it today.
Absolutely. Well, Brittany, do you want to take a minute? Your followers already know who you are, but do you want to introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Brittany Garcia. I am a mom and a wife, and I'm a mom to three. I just recently had my third baby in December, which was my second supernatural birth. And I've kind of just been on a journey ever since I first became pregnant with my firstborn of really learning how to have a supernatural birth and how to live a supernatural lifestyle as a mom.
Love it. And I have known Brittany since, like 6th grade.
Yeah, I think
known
we
each
were in
other.
6th grade.
Yeah, and so it's crazy to now come full circle. We're both moms of three and get to come together and do this. Well, Brittany, do you want to just go ahead and start telling us about your pregnancy with your first baby and how that went?
Sure. So with my first baby, I got pregnant 1 month after getting married with my husband. So it was a very quick, I did not think that I could get pregnant that easily and quickly because I struggled with irregular cycles. And so I didn't think I was as fertile as I apparently was. And so I conceived her very fast. And I was kind of like thrust into motherhood very quickly without kind of planning ahead and thinking, okay, now's the time to start a family. We just kind of were thrown into it. And that's not what we had planned on. Like, my husband and I wanted to wait a year before starting to have children. And so it kind of put a wrench in our plans completely, and we really had to trust in the Lord and His timing and for Him to provide financially as well for us and our baby. And at the time, I worked in the medical field as a receptionist, and I would take calls and I would translate stuff in Spanish and English at a clinic here in town. And I had always wanted to have a home birth at this point. And my husband was like, nope, you're not gonna have a home birth. We are going to the hospital. You're crazy, like why would you do a home birth? And the reasoning for me wanting to have a home birth is because I had heard about water births, and I knew that it would probably lessen the pain, and I was kind of scared of giving birth to my first baby. And so I was like, well, whatever I can do to make it more comfortable, and I don't like hospitals in general. And I was like, I just want to have the baby at home and have the baby in water and use a midwife. And I've always kind of gone the more natural route anyways because of my mom. And so that was kind of like what I guess led me to finding out about supernatural childbirth. So in the clinic that I worked in, I had asked one of the nurses if she knew of anyone who was a midwife, because I had no references. I didn't even know where to look. And she was like, yeah, I actually have a friend who's a midwife, and she gave me her contact information. And then about a month after I found out I was pregnant, or it was like maybe 2 weeks after I found out I was pregnant, I started bleeding with my first baby. And I thought I was going to lose her. I thought it was going to be a miscarriage, and I hadn't even contacted the midwife yet because I was so early. I was probably about 6 weeks pregnant at that point. And I called her, and she was like, well, unfortunately, if you're miscarrying, there's really nothing I can do. You would just go to the hospital if it gets really bad. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, Lord, I want to keep this baby. I don't want to miscarry. I just found out I was pregnant. And turns out, I think I had, we never really knew the full cause of it, because I did get an ultrasound and they couldn't really tell if it was anything with the placenta or what it had been, but I think I had a sensitive cervix. And so on and off for like the first trimester, I would bleed spontaneously. Wow. Because of intercourse and just, you know, having a very sensitive cervix. And I think it happens, it's more common than women think to bleed in your pregnancies. But doesn't necessarily mean that you're miscarrying. So that was really scary, but we leaned on the Lord, and we, you know, my pregnancy was very healthy. It went really well. But I had a lot of stress at work as well. And in the course of probably my first trimester, I talked with one of the nurses that I worked with, and she told me about the book Supernatural Childbirth by Jackie Mize. And that's really where the journey began towards believing that I would have a supernatural childbirth when I gave birth to my baby. So we had everything in line to have a home birth, and I was, you know, seeing my midwife at this point, and the nurse was the one that told me about the documentary. Not the book. My midwife told me about the book.
What documentary?
The documentary, The Business of Being Whole.
Yes, okay.
And so at this point, we still hadn't decided if we were going to do a home birth or not. Yeah. And so she was like, you should watch this with your husband. And so we watched it, and that documentary was what convinced him to have home birth. And because, you know, you don't really realize how much of the industry in the U.S. in particular, this documentary is, you know, detailing things in the U.S., not other countries per se. But in the U.S. it's very, it's predominant that if you have a hospital birth, that you might have some unexpected interventions that lead to other things, and that maybe could cause a cesarean section, even if you didn't want it. And so he was like, no, if you are going to have a baby, you're going to have a baby at home. And he's like, we're not going to the hospital unless we can absolutely avoid it. And so I was like, okay. So we jumped in full, you know, with both feet. And at that point was when we caught the midwife and everything. And so a few weeks into my pregnancy, of seeing her, a few, I guess, appointments, I should say, of seeing my midwife, she was like, hey, since you're a Christian, and she could see that I was very much into the supernatural from having been a missionary and seeing a bunch of stuff overseas as well, she was like, I think you would enjoy this book. So then she introduced me to the book by Jackie Mize, like my midwife did. And so I read it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Like, she wasn't even able to have babies, and she was actually able to conceive her first baby because of the book. And then she actually miscarried that baby, but she continued to believe that God would give her a pregnancy that would go to term, and then she would have a supernatural birth. And then the journey of her in the books was towards believing that eventually she would have a pain-free childbirth as well. And so I was like, I'm going to believe for that. You know, I can believe for that. And I started believing for it. Well, here's the mistake that I made with my firstborn. I started telling everybody around me what I was believing for. I told the nurses, I told the doctors I worked with, and all of the nurses in my... Oh my God, I thought you were crazy. They thought I was crazy. Because I was trying to figure out, like, okay, so I'm going to have a pain-free childbirth. How am I going to know when I go into labor? Because it's not going to hurt. And that was this mentality that I had. And I was convinced it was going to happen. And they were like, no, you're going to know when you're in labor. It's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt a lot. And I was like, but there has to be a way for me to know without it being painful. I don't believe it has to be painful. Well, their doubts really got to me. And a lot of people started telling me their horror stories of birth, and how painful it was, and how I wouldn't get a trophy for having a pain-free childbirth, how I wouldn't get a trophy for having a home birth. And I was like, but this is what I've chosen to do, you know? But their doubts started getting to me, and I that, because it was constantly being put into my mind every day that it was going to be opposite of what I was believing for, my brain started to believe it, and my heart started to believe it, even though I was convinced that it was possible to have a supernatural birth. And so I went into labor with my baby a few months later, and it was excruciatingly painful. It was so hard. I felt like I was hallucinating in between every contraction.
Oh my goodness.
I was having like flashbacks of things that happened in my life up to that point. So I felt like I was dying. Like I had heard stories of people that die, you know, during childbirth, and I was like, this is really scary. I wasn't dying by any means, but it was just so painful. And there were aspects, though, if I look back at my first birth, where it was supernatural in some ways. I had dilated to a certain point before I went into labor that was more than normal for a first-time mom. I think it was like at a 4.
That's pretty good.
Which is, you know, that's pretty good.
Most first-time moms like go in and they're like, I'm in full-blown active labor, and they're 1 or a 2.
Yeah.
So a 4 is almost double, I feel like, for most moms.
And that was abnormal, and I knew it was, and so I was like, I had good hope for it, you know. But then I went into labor. They had to break my water, which I think also contributed to the amount of pain that I felt. But my active labor from when they broke my water until I had my baby girl was 6 hours.
That's very fast for your first time.
And I had good progression. The thing was, they broke my water because her head was coming down at it was essentially stuck between a bubble of the amniotic sac in the amniotic fluid, and her head wasn't making good contact. So her head was a little bit tilted. She had a little bit of a bump on one side of her head when she was born, but other than that, things were fine. Now, right after I had her, I started to hemorrhage a little bit, and they gave me a shot of Pitocin to stop it, and it stopped. 5 days postpartum after I had Bethany, we got her tongue ties revised, and she started nursing really well. And then I also pumped a lot that day, but it was weird because the extra oxytocin being put into my body caused me to hemorrhage, because my
5 days postpartum.
5 days.
Wow.
My uterus had gotten flabby, and as a first-time mom, I didn't realize that it had gotten flabby because I was so stressed about the procedure. And then we had driven to Oklahoma City, and then came back, and I had pumped, and I fed her, and so it was like a lot of oxytocin all at once. So it made my uterus clamp down, like it should have been. And I think what we think happened is I had a little bit of a lining retained, and it came out when I started bleeding profusely. So we realized I was hemorrhaging at that point about an hour after it started, and it wasn't stopping. And we rushed to the hospital. My newborn baby had to go with my sister-in-law. Thank God she was here in town. And she took the baby for us, and we were in the hospital overnight.
Wow.
The bleeding finally stopped when my husband commanded it to stop. And because they hadn't even given me any medicine yet, and they didn't believe me that I was hemorrhaging, because I had on one of those like big depend diapers, but I was soaking through it so fast. And it was like the second one I had on, and I was like, babe, can you call the nurse? Like, I feel so uncomfortable. So she came and cleaned me up, and then I saw her face, and she was like, oh my gosh, because this huge clot fell out.
Did they know that you had a home birth?
Yes, and there was definitely a lot of prejudice that I saw in their faces when they heard that I had a home birth and that it was planned. And I was scared, because I was like, you know, what are they going to think of me? You know, and are they going to treat me the same, or are they going to treat me different? And I definitely felt like at first they didn't really believe that I was saying that I was hemorrhaging, or either that, or they were like, kind of like, well, you kind of deserved it because you weren't in the hospital.
You didn't have a baby in the hospital.
Exactly.
Wow.
So that was scary, but then, you know, it resolved, and I went home, but I lost so much energy because of that. I didn't get transfusions. I probably should have, because I think, according to my calculations, I think I lost close to a cup of blood.
Wow.
And I just kind of, because of my lack of energy, I thought, oh, this is normal postpartum stuff. But I was tired for 4 months straight until like January.
Wow.
And I had her in August. And I literally was sleeping like all the time. When she would nap, I was asleep. And that was just very difficult for my firstborn. Well, then 7 months later, you know, I didn't get the birth that I wanted. 7 months later, I had the opportunity to believe again for a supernatural childbirth, because I got pregnant with my second baby.
At 7 months
postpartum. So I had just gotten my energy back.
You just feel like yourself. There's 3 months later.
I got pregnant, and I had thought the month before I got pregnant, I had thought that I was, but I wasn't. And I took a test and it was negative. So then I remember being really scared because at this point I had a 6-month-old and I was like, I am not ready to do this whole thing again.
Yeah.
You know, it was so stressful, you know, just trying to learn how to be a mom and with everything that comes with that, new territory, you know, and not to mention, I didn't feel like I was ready to believe again.
Yeah.
For what hadn't happened according to what I believed for. And so I was like, well, you know, if I'm pregnant, I am, you know, we'll figure it out. And I was not. And then the next month I feel like I was like, well, if it happens, it happens. And I got pregnant.
Love it.
So they're 16 months apart, my 2 girls, and it's like, it was so fun when they were little, and still to this day, they're best friends. It's kind of like having twins, honestly.
Yes.
I can't compare to having twins, but as far as like the age difference,
it's hard in the beginning because my first 2 are 19 months, so it was hard in like the first few months, but now it's like the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Like once they can walk, you're like, oh yes.
Yes, and they're best buddies, and they can do everything together because they have the same interests at the same time. So there are pros and there are cons for sure.
You don't sleep a lot in the beginning.
You don't. That was the hardest part, probably sleep. But so I was pregnant with my second. And I was like, okay, am I going to believe or am I going to just lay down and just let things happen to me? And I was like, well, I choose to believe, you know, that I can have it even though I didn't get it. I didn't get a pain-free birth. So this time around, I changed completely how I guess, acted and how I talked about it. I did not tell a single soul what I was believing.
That was my question. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't tell anybody. I told my husband. And that was it. I did not tell my midwives. I did not tell my friends. And I didn't tell anybody, really, besides my husband. I think I told maybe one friend. And it was somebody who could believe with.
Yes.
And so my husband was just like, just get it in your soul. You have to get it into your subconscious mind that is going to happen. And imagine your perfect birth. And believe the Lord for it because he promised it in his word. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to take that. I'm going to meditate on it because that's what the word meditate means. You think about it, but you think about it in such a way that your brain literally believes it has happened.
Yes.
And there's a thing with your brain.
It's called the law of like, oh man, I talked about it last week. It's like the law of psychosocial or association or psychophysical, something like that, where if your mind believes it, then the body will follow.
Exactly.
And so the birth is 60 to 70% mental, I like to say, and the rest of it is physical. And so when you bring in also the spiritual part, it's like this is 100% mental and spiritual, and my body's going to do what I tell it to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I imagined my birth the way I wanted it to go.
Yeah.
And I imagined giving birth very peacefully and going into labor and maybe not even knowing I was in labor, going into labor and not being in pain at all. And I believed for a fast birth.
Yeah.
And I just continually put that into my mind, and I reread the book, Supernatural Childbirth by Mize, and I was like, okay, it's going to happen. It's going to happen for me. If God gave it to her and he's given it to other women, then it can be for me too.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I was just quiet on it, and I believed it in my heart. And I feel like it finally got in my soul probably a month before I gave birth. Like it was a continual thing and a continual casting down of your thoughts, because you have to really, the thing is you wrestle back and forth, like thinking, is it going to happen, or maybe it's not going to happen,
or someone will say a comment that maybe they don't even know what you're believing for, but they make a comment and it sticks with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, you can be polite with if people, like, you know, healthcare workers or whatever say something and it's negative, right? It's their duty, obviously, to tell you if, hey,
like pros and cons.
You know, like if something is like not going right in your pregnancy, and they're like, hey, this is something that we need to address, or maybe baby's breech, you know, and they kind of start to put that fear in your heart, not intentionally, they're just doing their job. And then you can be like, okay, like, you know, what can we do to address this? What is the protocol or whatever? And they'll tell you, and then you can be like, okay, and then you can choose to believe what you have already had in your heart and reject what they, like, the negative part of what they say.
Were you still working at that job during this pregnancy?
No, I quit 1 week before I had Bethany.
Okay, so you weren't having that, like negativity,
not at all.
Okay.
I would only have negativity when people would comment on my pregnancy.
Yeah.
Or people at church, you know, and they didn't know, you know, and there were maybe things that my midwife said that kind of would scare me a little bit, but I just
Did you have the same midwife?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I love my midwife, you know, but there was also the point of her where she has had people who have believed for a supernatural childbirth and then don't get it. And so her job as a professional was a little bit harder because she's seen both sides.
Because they don't want you to walk in and be like, this is going to, like, I see this a lot. I have a few clients who use the pain-free childbirth with Miriam Wathen, I think, and some clients have had it and some haven't, and their providers are always like, okay, this may not go the way you're wanting it to go, just as like to prepare you so you're not walking in like with your head in the clouds. But
and it's to
protect them and to protect you, but at the same time it's like, okay, but you're getting into like my psyche and like my mind, and I know that this can happen for me, so I don't need that.
Exactly.
So it's a fine line.
It is a really fine line, and it's hard to navigate.
Yeah.
And I was like, this whole time, I was like, you gave me the book. Like, to my
you did it.
You gave it to me. Don't you believe it? You know, that's kind of like how I felt.
Yeah.
But I get it. Like, I can step outside the situation, and I understand why she has that perspective. Yeah. But I was like, at the same time, I was like, well, it may have been other ladies who believed for it and didn't get it, but that's not going to happen to me. I was like, it was like ride or die, basically. So this is the part where I did experience a supernatural birth. I had one birth that was completely natural. Obviously, there were, I guess I shouldn't say completely natural. There were aspects of my birth with Bethany, my firstborn, that were natural, and there were aspects that were supernatural, such as my labor was very short. My bleeding stopped when my husband told it to stop. But then there were other aspects like the pain part that were completely natural. And it was like any other birth. So now I'm going to get into the supernatural birth. With Adeline, I remember going into labor, but I didn't know I was going into labor. So I was having contractions on and off, and
this was your second?
My second.
Okay.
Yes. So we had gone through the whole, like, I believed my birth, I knew it would happen, and I didn't leave any option in any room in my mind for plan B. There was no plan B. It was, this is going to happen, and that's it. And so I was like, okay, Lord, like, let me know when I'm in labor because it's not going to hurt. Like, you have to tell me when I'm in labor because I'm not going to know. And I remember I would have on and off Braxton Hicks, right? And Braxton Hicks, they squeeze you and then they release. They're not painful by any means.
It's like a large period cramp.
And they squeeze. And then they release. And they go away if you take a bath and it's not real labor, right? So, or if you're dehydrated, you'll have them a lot. And I had quite a few Braxton Hicks, and I was like, okay, I know those are not the real deal. And then one night I was having contractions that were the real contractions, but they were wrapping around kind of from the back of my back, my spine, and then they would wrap around and push the baby and squeeze. But they weren't painful. And I was like, okay, I think that these are real contractions. And I started timing them, and I let my midwife know, and she was like, okay, get in the bath and see if they slow down or stop and let me know. And so I got in the bathtub, did that. I was in there for like 20 minutes. I dropped my phone in the bathtub, and I scared myself, and they stopped.
Oh my God.
And I was like, okay, well, was that for real or not? And then I told her, like, okay, they've stopped, and I scared myself by dropping my phone. And she was like, okay, well, it's probably not the real deal, you know. And so a few nights later, it happened again, and she said the same thing, get in the bathtub. So I got in the bathtub this time, and I was timing them, and they were very quick, in quick succession. And also, I forgot to mention this part, about 2 or 3 days before I went into labor with Adeline, because I had her on a...
How many weeks were you when you had your first and your second?
Yes, my first, I had her at 38 weeks.
As a first time?
No, 39 weeks.
Okay.
And 4 days, I think it was. With Adeline, it was 38 and 4.
Okay, so you go before.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And, but with Bethany, I actually thought I was further along than I actually was, because she did the newborn testing with like their stretching abilities, and she figured out that she was earlier than we thought.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I had Adeline a whole week earlier, and at my midwife appointment, they checked my cervix, and they were like, she was like, did you order your birth kit no. Because I was like 38 weeks.
Yeah.
And she was like, you better like get that expedited as soon as possible. You order it when you leave here because I don't think you're gonna make it to the weekend.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh, and it was like 3 days away. So I ordered it and it did come in time. I've had it in my house. But I was literally at a 7.
At your 38-week appointment, and you had been not having signs of labor?
No, I had no signs
of labor. Oh my gosh, you're like in transition.
Yes, that's what she
Wow.
said. She's like, this is not possible.
Wow.
And I was like, well, I was like, praise God. Like, I believe for it. And I told my body to start doing the things it needed to do before I ever knew I was in labor. So technically, I was in early labor, but I did not feel like it.
You thought it was Braxton Hicks, but it really was early labor.
It was,
who knows?
Yeah,
oh my
who
gosh.
knows? Because I wasn't having them consistently enough to even be considered like labor, you know? And so my body literally just started opening it up all by itself.
That's
and I was like 50% effaced or something like that. Wow. And so she was like, you're gonna have a baby within a week. Mm-hmm. So I got my birth kit, and then this whole thing happened with me dropping my phone, and then a few days later, I got in the bathtub again, and she was like, okay, just let me know, keep me posted. And so I was like, well, they're like every 5 minutes, you know, but they're not painful. She was like, are they painful? And I'd be like, no, but they're intense, you know, like they're starting to get stronger. I could tell that they're stronger, and she wasn't really believing me. That's the thing. Like,
because you weren't saying that they were painful, and that was what she was looking for.
Yeah. And a lot of providers will say that's the sign. Like, are they painful? Like, they'll ask you.
Yeah.
And so I was like, they're just strong, you know, and I can tell that they're real contractions. Yeah. And then she was like, okay, well, just let me know. And then I was kind of starting to doubt myself. I was like, well, maybe I'm not in labor, and this is just the same thing I had a couple days ago. So they kind of stopped. I let her know. I said, I'm going to try to go to sleep and see if I can sleep, and then I'll let you know if anything picks back up, because they had spaced out. And so I got out of the bathtub at like midnight, and oh, here's the other thing. We had intercourse too, my husband and I, and that's what
always does the trick.
Put me into labor, and that's what I got in the bathtub.
Yeah.
And so I went to sleep after that. After I got in the bathtub, and I was like, okay, well, let's see if I can sleep, because I couldn't when I was in labor with Bethany at all. And I fell asleep, and on and off throughout the night, I remember feeling uncomfortable, like my back was achy a little bit, and I felt like I had a little bit of period cramping. That's another sign. Like, every time I go into labor, like a few days before, I'll start having like period type cramps, like really low in my belly. And I was having that, and I just felt so uncomfortable, but I was actually sleeping. Like, I was having dreams about being uncomfortable, basically.
Out of 7, sleeping with contractions that don't hurt. Love it.
And so I woke up, I remember waking up at like 6 a.m. and I really needed to go to the bathroom, like urgently. I felt like I had diarrhea. So I jumped out of bed, but I didn't take my phone because I really needed to get to the bathroom. So our master bedroom is in the back of the house, and I was like, I was rushing to the middle of the house to that other bathroom, which is right next to my daughter's room. She was sleeping, and I went to the bathroom, you know, I did need to go, and then I remember thinking, wow, these are like really, really intense period cramps. Like, what the heck did I eat, you know? And it was just like
kind of like a
stomach aches. Like, we have really bad diarrhea. And I was like, this is horrible. And I was like, I thought it had been maybe 10 minutes. At this point, I had been in there for over an hour.
Oh my gosh.
And I realized, like, the light bulb went off, that I was in labor, and that these were not period cramps, or not period cramps, but diarrhea type cramps. It was actually contractions that were not stopping. They were literally, like, if you think of them as a wave, they would come and stop, and then they would start again immediately. So I was in very active labor. Mind you, I was past 7 at this point, because I've been at my appointment. So I went straight into like active labor, essentially. I slept through all of my early labor throughout the night, and then it like activated at 6 a.m. And this is another thing that is so weird, and I've heard other people talk about it, but it's not very common. I smelled this smell that smelled like hay right before I went and got my husband.
That is so weird. I've heard one other mom say that before.
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
It smelled like grass.
That's
like
so weird.
Like a really earthy smell. Almost like plants.
Like a hormonal type thing.
It was weird.
That's so interesting.
It was so strange. But I remember reading about that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like the baby's coming. And I'm in the bathroom and I don't have my phone.
Wow.
And how is my midwife gonna know? How is my husband gonna know I'm in labor? Like, what if I have the baby on the toilet? And so I was like freaking out, and I was like, okay, Lord, help me to get to the back. You know, help them stop just for a moment so I can go to the back and tell him. So I remember thinking, okay, I'm gonna wait till this one kind of subsides a little bit, and then I got up and ran to the back as fast as I could, and I'm like doubling over the bed. I'm like, Roberto, call Vanessa, call her, because I think the baby's coming. And he forgot his name. He was like, oh, what? You know, he was totally asleep. I gave him no warning.
Yeah.
I don't even think I told him I was gonna take the bath, because it was like really late whenever I went into the bathroom the first time. And so he had no clue that I had been like,
he was in a dead sleep, getting woken up to even like sleep.
The baby's coming out. So it's just very intense, and I remember thinking, I had read a book spontaneously. Somebody had given me a book about a month before I had Addie, called Unassisted Childbirth, and I wasn't going to read it because I wasn't going to have, you know, an unassisted childbirth. I wasn't planning for that. And I was like, well, maybe I should just read it, you know. And I remember, I'm so glad I read it, because it was literally about women who actually planned to have an unassisted childbirth. I wouldn't recommend it per se, especially because of some of the things I've experienced in childbirth. I think it's important to have someone there, you know, to help.
It's such a controversial topic.
It is, and obviously everybody can pick for themselves, but personally I wouldn't choose to do it, given what I've experienced. And so I had read that book, and I was like, well, if those women did it unassisted, then I can too.
Sure.
Because
if you have to, you have to. Yeah.
I realized that the baby was actually going to come before the midwife was going to make it.
So you're in the bathtub, and you're thinking like, I know I can't make it.
I was like, I felt like I had to push already, and I had only been in there for like 20 minutes maybe.
Yeah.
At this point, like it had been about an hour and 20 minutes since I had gone into labor. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna have to deliver the baby by myself with my husband. Yeah. And we had the birth kit, so we had like the clamp and the cord and all of the medical supplies if we needed them. And so I was like, okay, Jesus, you got me. Like I need you to help me. And I was scared because I had kind of started to hemorrhage right after I had my first. That was like the one thing that went through my mind. Like she's not here to give me Pitocin if I need it. And
that's just when you call 911.
Exactly, for sure. And so every other contraction at this point started to hurt, and I would recenter myself in between the contractions, because they would go away completely, and it wasn't at all mentally how it was with my first, where I couldn't even think between the contractions. So I was like, okay, I know that I can do this, and I know what I'm believing for, and then I would recenter myself, and the next contraction would not hurt. So every other one, it seemed like they were a little bit painful, but nowhere near how I experienced it with my firstborn. And so as I progressed, I was like, started feeling like I needed to push. So I started pushing a little bit in between the contractions, and I was like roaring in the bathtub, and my husband comes running in, and this whole time he's been trying to figure out the dang birth pool.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't know what he was doing, but he was running throughout the house. I'm like, you just need the birth pool, like literally just inflate it. And he was like running.
Those things are so complicated. I've been to so many births with birth pools, and we've never actually used one.
Oh my gosh.
I've only had one successful mom get it set up and filled up with water, and she got in and was like, it's too much, I can't. You almost have to have it set up like a week or two before with everything, because it's like they're not easy.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. And that's what we learned too.
Yeah.
So needless to say, I was in water, which I wanted to be.
Just in your smaller bathtub.
In my bathtub.
Yeah.
And so he's frantic, and I was like making a lot of noise, because it was just so intense, and I was starting to push, and I felt, you know, between my legs, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, is that the sac? And I touched it, and the sac burst, like on my fingertips.
Oh my gosh, how cool!
Because it was coming out, you know, and my water hadn't broken. Because my husband kept asking me if my water had broken yet, and I was like, no, I don't think so. But I had nothing to compare it to because I had it broken for me the first time. And so I was like, babe, my water just broke. He's like, are you sure? I'm like, yes, I felt it. It felt like a balloon popping underwater. And he was like, oh my gosh, you know. And I was like, you know, at this point they got very real really quick.
Oh yeah,
you
you lost that cushion.
And the cushion was gone. But I think honestly having my water intact that whole time really helped me to manage them. And so it broke, and then he came in, and I had a few more contractions, and I pushed her out, and he like came in the bathroom right as her head was crowning. And the ring of fire was like nothing compared to with my first. And I pushed her out really fast actually, but she came out face up. And so she was sunny side up, and obviously that's not like optimal birth position. And when she was born, she went like this. And so I tore so badly because of that.
She did that as she was coming out.
She had her hands tucked, and I remember her coming out, and I grabbed her like under her arms, and I remember her hands were like straight out.
Oh wow.
And so, and I didn't need to turn her or anything, so I know she was face up when she came out. And I just grabbed her from my chest, and my husband grabbed her bottom, and I grabbed her like top part of her, under her arms, and we put her on my chest, and it was just the most glorious experience ever. And I was like, oh my gosh, I did it. And I said, I did it. And I remembered saying right before I pushed her out, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Because I was like getting to the point where I was like, my midwife's not going to make it. And I was like, I got to do this on my own. And I pushed her out probably in like 15 minutes.
Wow.
I had only been in the bathtub for about an hour by the time she was born. And then my midwife made it 15 minutes after. We called her. She instructed us how to cut the cord.
Oh my gosh.
And Roberto could not find the birth kit. And my midwife was like, put a hat on her, you know, because she was like, I wanted to get cold because she wasn't there. And just preventatively, now knowing certain things I know now, I probably wouldn't put a hat on her.
Yeah.
But it's better for you to like smell the hat. And so he cut the cord long, and then she kind of, I guess, trimmed it or helped her when she got there. But she was like, okay, let's like check you. And I had torn so bad.
Did your placenta come out before your midwife got there?
Oh yeah, so I delivered the placenta. She got on FaceTime with me, and I'm like showing her my hoo-ha on FaceTime. I'm like, this is so weird. And she's like, it's okay. So she's like flying down the highway, and she's instructing me like what to do, and my husband. So I got it out, which was, you know, it was a breeze. There was nothing wrong, but there was something hanging. And she was like, okay, I think you have a little bit of retained something. She's like, can you like get it out? And I was like, no, it's not coming out.
It like hurts my stomach to think about that.
Yeah, that was me. That was what I tore.
That was you? You tore that. What degree was it?
It was nearly, I think it was a 3rd degree tear.
Wow.
And
so with like your perineum?
My perineum was like torn down and into the birth canal. And then I had lost like a piece of my labia was like hanging. So like that's really graphic, but that's basically what happened. And if anything grosses you out,
could you even feel it though at the moment?
It was
the hormonal rush and you're in water.
I didn't realize that I had torn.
Well, that's good.
Yes, thank God.
Oh my gosh.
So thank God I had a midwife. You know, she came and she was like, okay, I have to check if this needs to go to the hospital. You know, he needs to go to the hospital to fix this. And I still had control of my rectum and everything. And so she was like, okay, I can fix it.
She fixed you at home?
She fixed me. But she sat there and stared at it for like a good 20 minutes or more. And it actually might have been closer to like 30, 40. And she just like looked at how it all pieced together, and she was like, okay.
Because most midwives, I think, they will only do like a 1st or a 2nd degree tear.
Yeah, it was so
wow.
bad. And she didn't want me to have to go to the hospital, so she's like, she just studied it a lot, and then she figured it out, and she like literally sewed it with, I think they call it a ladder stitch. And she sewed me up. It took like way over an hour to stitch me. But oh my gosh, the recovery was so hard.
That was my question.
Because I basically, I had torn so badly. Because of the position of her, and I just pushed her out, and there was no like restraint on my end with pushing.
Or counter pressure, because a lot of times they'll like put their hands on your perineum to stabilize.
There was none of that. I just pushed her out as I felt I needed to.
Exactly.
And no one was there to guide me. And not that I needed the guidance, but I think it would have helped to not tear. And so they did give me lidocaine and all that, but I still don't feel everything.
My stomach hurts.
I was
like,
sorry.
Just thinking, I just can't imagine.
Yeah, and I was like, Well, I got my supernatural childbirth.
Yeah.
Right? It was pain-free.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Nearly completely. Like, except for the few contractions in between, the birth was pain-free itself, like pushing the baby out. And then I tore. And I was like, I don't want that the next time. Like, I'm going to still believe for that whenever I have another baby. So I healed up, you know, and then about a year after having her, I was like, I want another baby, you know, and we were like, well, we feel like we're ready, you know, to try for another one. And I think it was like almost exactly a year ago to the day, I conceived Gabriel. And we didn't know what his gender was. We held off from finding out. But at this point, I had experienced, obviously, a natural birth and a supernatural birth. And I was like, okay, now what I would love, Lord, is to have a pain-free birth and no tearing whatsoever. Amen. And just to heal very quickly, as if I hadn't had a baby. You know?
Did you tear with Bethany or just with Alan?
Just a little bit. Okay. It was very minimal. It didn't even require stitches. Yeah. It was like a scratch.
Okay.
That's kind of what it felt like.
That's how both of my home births were, and I didn't need anything for my last two.
Yeah.
And it was the recovery-wise, when you don't need stitches, it's night and day.
Yes.
And
it's so different. Yeah. You know, you don't have the itching and the discomfort.
And you just can move around a lot more. Yeah.
It's easier to take care of your baby.
Yes, absolutely.
For sure. So I was like, okay, I'm choosing to believe, but this time I really felt like the Lord was putting on my heart, because I had already I had started being really faithful with my YouTube channel and uploading on it. And you know, when I had Addie, I don't even think I was active on it whenever I was either like, no, I wasn't active on it, because I started it back up whenever she was like 7 months old.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I probably started seeing your stuff after she was born.
Yeah. So it was after she was born, and I really felt like God put it on my heart to record my birth and to put the video online. And I was like, okay. And I was kind of nervous. Yeah, for Gabriel. Yeah. And I was kind of nervous, but at the same time I was like, well, I know that it's going to happen again. Yeah. I'm 100% positive this time. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to believe and confess, and I'm going to do everything I did the last time. Yeah. But I told a lot of people. I told a lot of people what I was believing for. And I had, at the beginning of the year, the Lord told me to record the first video that I did about having a pain-free birth, which was the birth of Addie.
And we will link that in the show notes for anyone who hasn't seen that. We'll put that in the
it's a good video. That one was recorded before I had Gabriel. Yeah. Before I even was pregnant. And so I felt like He told me to do that. And at the beginning of last year, I recorded it and posted it. And then little did I know that I would get pregnant just a few months later.
It's like the Lord knew.
Yes.
The Lord knew.
Yes. So, and when I remember whenever I was pregnant with Bethany, I looked on YouTube for supernatural childbirths, and there was zero. Yeah. There was one lady who had talked about the book. Yeah. And she talked about her experience, but there was no video to go with it. Yeah. There's a lot of childbirth videos on YouTube. There's home births, you know, all variations of home births, and there are hospital births that people record and put on there. There was not a single one that I could find that was a supernatural birth. And this was 4 years ago. And so I was like, okay, well, I know how much I desire to see what it would look like. Physically see a woman give birth and have it be supernatural. And I was like, okay, well, okay, Lord, if you want me to do this, I'll do it. And I felt like He told me, be that person that you wish you would have had, so that other women can see what it's like to have a supernatural birth. And I was like, okay. And I was kind of scared, you know, I was like, it's really vulnerable.
It's a lot to put yourself out there, because I live streamed my third birth, and that was petrifying. So I was like, and everyone always asks me, well, what if you have to go to the hospital, or what if something goes wrong? And I was like, well, that's not going to happen. And if it does, then it does. Right. And there's nothing I can do to control it. But it's hard, because I was like, this is the most vulnerable I will ever be. Yes. And everyone could just watch me live. It's not even like,
it's not like you
pre-recorded. I can't edit anything out because it's live, and it was amazing. So yeah, it is, but it's a kind of scary feeling, because you can't just keep it to yourself anymore. It's like, well, now everyone's going to see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember watching the birth, and I had also watched the live stream of Lovelies, that had inspired you to do yours. And I was like, if they did it, I can do it. You know, and I was kind of like debating whether it should be on Instagram or YouTube, and I felt like they told me to do YouTube. So I did. Well, right before I was about to give birth with Gabriel, my camera broke. and I had no camera to record anything, and then a friend lent me one, and it was just an amazing like scene of events that the Lord orchestrated so that I could actually record it, because it wasn't going to happen. So my pregnancy itself with Gabriel was very difficult. In some ways it was easy, in other ways it was hard. I had a lot of health things that happened in my pregnancy with him. I had a yeast infection after yeast infection for like 6 months straight. Finally went away with, I used, what do they call that, silver?
Colloidal silver?
Not colloidal, the other one, structured silver.
Okay.
Finally went away with that, and that was the only thing that worked. And I tried over-the-counter stuff and home remedies, nothing worked except for that. But I also had severe migraine, like a migraine so severe that I went to the hospital for.
Wow.
Didn't realize I was really low in trace minerals, and that's kind of like what caused that. And then there was just some other things that happened, and I was just always sick. Like I always had some kind of cold.
And you didn't know that it was a boy?
No.
Okay.
I had no idea, and I didn't know that sometimes in the natural, like yeast infections can be more prevalent with a boy pregnancy.
It's true, because with James I had like 3 or 4, and with my girls I had none. I was like, what?
Yeah, and we don't need to struggle with it, but that's just the reality of what happens.
There's the hormonal differences, I think, between boys and girls when you're pregnant affects your body differently.
And so I think the thing that I would have done differently is that I didn't really remember, or I don't know what the heck was wrong with me during the beginning of my pregnancy. I feel like part of it was I was just so tired from having 2 kids, and I really wasn't like thinking about being pregnant that much at all. It wasn't like it was with Addie, where I was like inputting that stuff into my mind constantly. I really only started focusing on having a supernatural birth and pregnancy at the end of my pregnancy, even though I felt like the Lord wanted me to record it. And so I struggled a lot with my health, and it was very difficult in that manner. I lost a lot of weight as well, had an extreme food aversion in the beginning of my pregnancy, and I could have avoided that. Like I know that I could have believed for it to not to be like that, and it would have been that way. But I didn't, and it's because I was lax on my end, you know. Because whatever you're thinking about, and then I was thinking, oh, this pregnancy is so hard. Whatever you're thinking about, it's going to continue to be that way.
And it just makes it worse.
It does.
Yeah.
And you attract that stuff to you when you think about it. And so, anyways, it was just very hard. And then I remember being like, my husband was like, why haven't you been declaring over your pregnancy this way, the way that you did with the girls? And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. So I got it back, you know, the final month or 2 of my pregnancy, I started really ingesting the same things I did with Bethany and Addie, but mostly with Addie. And then I went into labor. Let me think about how I went into labor with him. So got checked by my midwife right before. And you had
the same midwife again with all 3 of your babies? Okay.
And same birth team.
Yeah.
But really the head midwife this time was different than the first few times, but she attended the birth, but she didn't catch the baby. So with Gabriel, I had them check me again with my cervix about 38 weeks, I think it was, with him. But we thought I was like 40. That's right. Okay. I forgot about this. So major detail with Gabriel is that they thought that my due date, I thought my due date was December something, like the end of December.
Yes.
And I got the ultrasound done, and the lady was like, how far along did you say you were? And I told her, and she was like, no. She's like, the baby's measuring 3 weeks earlier than that. And so I thought that my due date was the beginning of January. That's what it was. And she's like, no, your due date is going to be somewhere around the beginning of December, like December 6th or 10th or something like that. Is what she told me. And I was like, no way, like there's no way that it's that off. But we were kind of like debating whether or not we should go with the date I had or the date that they gave me according to measurements. And we were kind of like, well, if you go into labor early, this is what we'll do. And if you go all the way to what you originally thought, we won't cause labor to start. You know, we're not going to do any interventions. So that's kind of like what we were thinking. But the entire month of December, the beginning of December, towards when I had him, it was in limbo because we were like, we don't know
if you're like 40 weeks or 37 weeks. And that's so funny because I think in a lot of ways our third pregnancies were similar, because that happened to me too, where according to my like period and the dates that I had, my due date was 2.5 weeks earlier than what the ultrasound tech gave me.
Okay.
They had me 2.5 weeks later, and she ended up coming like right in the middle of those, but my midwife was like, this baby's like 2 weeks overdue. So it was just, it just goes to show like ultrasounds are not the end all be all, and the measurements can be so, like they can fluctuate so much based on how much fluid you have and where your baby is and how much like weight you've gained as the mom, and so it's really hard to get a truly accurate picture.
It's so
just
hard.
from ultrasound.
It's so
like
hard.
they're so faulty.
Yes, they are, and you know, this will get me on a whole tangent, but people telling you how big your baby is and you not being able to give birth to them is hogwash.
Yeah,
that is it's not accurate.
No, because it can be like 1 pound to 1.5 pounds off. Like
Yes.
I have my last 2 mamas I was in the birth with were told their babies were going to be 10 pounds plus. They had a 7 pound and an 8 pound baby.
Oh my gosh.
Via C-section, and they could have easily had a vaginal delivery. And it's just,
and the way the pelvis stretches, and
Yes.
the way the baby's head conforms as they're being born, it literally distorts like the shape of their head.
It's like physiologically impossible unless you have gestational diabetes or a growth issue for your body to create a baby you cannot give birth to.
Yes.
So I can talk about that all day. But anyways.
So yeah, the date was totally off from what I thought, and I was like, okay, well, we're just gonna kind of prepare. The baby will be born somewhere between December and January, middle of December, beginning of January.
Yeah.
And so I remember getting checked, you know, and we thought I was supposedly like 40 weeks.
Yeah.
And my midwife checked me and she was like, I don't know how you keep doing this, girl. She's like, you're like 6.5. I can stretch you to a 7.
Wow.
And mind you, I was closer to 37 weeks at this point than I was 40. And she was like, well, you got your birth kit? And I was like, yep.
Got it this time.
And she was like, well, I don't think you're gonna make it to like the due date they gave you with the ultrasound, which was the beginning of January. She's like, you're gonna have this baby pretty soon, probably within the next week or 2. I was like, okay, great. You know, like my body's doing what it needs to do. I was effacing. I was a little bit. I guess it was puffier on one side than the other. So
like
it wasn't
cervical lip.
Yeah, there was
almost,
a lip on it, and it wasn't going like flat all the way around. It kind of had a dimple or whatever you want to call it on one side. And so she was pretty confident that I would have the baby soon because that's what happened with my first. And I was encouraged, you know, I was like, great, you know, my body's doing what I'm telling it to do. It's doing the work before I get into labor, like the time before my first supernatural birth. And so I was really excited, and I remember going home and telling Roberto, and he was like, yay, you know, so exciting. And we're like, we are going to make sure we call the midwife early. Ample time for her to get there. And I was like, and thank the Lord. I was like, thank God, I'm not going to have the tearing that I did. I was like, I'm not dealing with that again. I'm going to have an amazing birth, and I'm not going to tear. So, you know, and then my camera breaks, and I was stressed out about that. And I was like, I can't have the baby until I have my camera, because I was like, I really wanted to capture it. I've been thinking about it for the whole time I was pregnant. We didn't know the gender either. And I was like, it'd be so cool to capture that on camera,
moment,
you know, and just for my own sake. Like, I want to be able to watch my birth.
Yeah.
But I knew I was supposed to post it as well. And so I had a friend that lent me her camera. I'm so grateful to her for doing that. And then I had a friend who also had offered to do birth pictures for me. So I was like, can you manage the camera a little bit while you're there? You know, I'll set it up on a tripod and then you can film. And she was like, sure, you know. So she came and how did it happen? I'm trying to remember. I feel like it gets blurry after a little bit.
I know.
But
we will link, so Brittany went ahead and filmed like her whole birth and posted it on her YouTube channel. So we'll put that in the notes too, so that you can go back and watch it. It's so beautiful.
Yes. I cried so much editing this video.
I cried watching it. I watched it twice.
I couldn't finish it. Like getting into the story a little bit later, you'll see why it was so hard for me to film. I mean, edit after the fact. But Okay, so I recollected my thoughts here.
Yeah.
With Gabriel, I went into labor very early in the morning. I went to bed and I was uncomfortable, and my oldest daughter had come into our bed, and I was like, man, if I'm going into labor, I don't want her in here because I don't want to wake her up. So I had Roberto take her back, or I picked her up, I can't even remember. We put her back in her bed, and I went back to bed. And it was the same sort of scenario that it was with the first, my last birth, not my first birth, my second birth. And I was like, well, if I can sleep through it, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not in labor.
Yeah, for real.
And I couldn't get comfortable. And I remember feeling a lot of pressure in my back, and just the same kind of period cramps. I was like, here we go again. It was like the same thing. And I kind of let my midwife know that I thought I was in labor, but I was like, but I'm going to hold off just a little bit because I don't want her freaking out and flying over here, because I feel like it's going to take a little bit more time this time. And so it was like, I think 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. when it really started, and then I got up at 3, and I went to the bathroom and I wiped, and there was a little bit of bloody show. And I was like, okay, I think this is the real thing, And I had experienced, obviously, the pain-free birth the time before, so I knew they were real contractions, and they were starting to come like every 5 minutes. So I let my midwife know, and she was like, okay, just let me know how things go. Mind you, they had gotten into their cars respectively because they're in different states, and they were already driving to me, but they didn't tell me.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay.
They weren't going to miss this.
No, and they didn't want me freaking out. Which was what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not going to tell them until a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I didn't go back to bed. And then about an hour into them driving, she told me, hey, I'm on my way.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, great.
Perfect.
So I jump up, and I'm like timing my contractions. Yeah. I jump up, and I start frantically cleaning my house, because there was stuff all over my bedroom floor and all over the house. And I was like, they're all going to be here. My photographer's going to be here. I don't want them tripping over things, I need it to be clean, at least on the floors. So I cleaned everything up. And then she got there, and my contractions basically stopped because I was in this flurry of doing things. And she was like asking me, like, how far apart are they? And I'm like, well, they've kind of stalled out. So I calmed down, I sat down for a little bit. She got there, she checked me, and she was like, you're basically at an 8.
Wow.
And I was like, great, and she's like, but Roberto, I was so calm compared to like the last time where I was like frantically telling him to call the midwives. He was like, is she really in labor? And he was like asking my midwife, she's like, yeah, oh yeah. She's like, she's in labor.
She's in 8.
Yeah. And he's like, so we're actually gonna have a baby today? And she was like, oh yes, you will have a baby in your arms by tonight. And she was like, actually, I wouldn't be surprised if it's within the next few hours.
Yeah.
And he was like, really? Because I was so calm.
Yeah.
And I was not really feeling any pain at all.
That's amazing.
I was barely feeling the contractions, but I knew they were there.
Yeah.
And this was obviously early labor.
Yeah.
So, she was like, okay, why don't you, I obviously was super excited, and that's one of the telltale signs you're still in early labor.
Oh,
you're
yeah.
really excited. And I was like, I can't wait to meet the baby and find out if it's a boy or girl, because we had picked out a boy and a girl name. We didn't know what the baby was going to be called. And finally, she was like, why don't you try to sleep, because you're just too excited. So I went to sleep, and the contractions basically fizzled out.
Yeah.
And she was giving me like an herbal tincture to kind of help things move along. So I stopped progressing essentially, and I just stalled out. I wasn't having any kind of contractions, and she was like, okay, well, the other midwife had gotten into town, but she went straight to like her mom's house because she lives in town, and she was like, okay, we're gonna just go hang out, and you guys chill for a little bit, and then and we'll figure out what to do. Well, in the back of my mind, I had not told them this, that day was the play at Victory at our church.
Yes, I remember this.
Yeah. And I was like, I really wanted to go because it was Christmas, and I think
was this the week before Christmas?
It was the week before Christmas. The day before was Addie's birthday too. I forgot to mention that. She turned 2 the day before. We had a little birthday party that evening, and then I went into labor. Yeah. So funny. It's so psychological. So I was just kind of going back and forth on whether I wanted to do any kind of interventions. And my husband was not okay with it at first, and then because she had talked about doing a midwife's brew, which is like champagne with
Castor oil, almond butter,
and something like
apricot juice.
Yeah, juice.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not horrible, but
interesting. Yeah,
it's the texture. You gotta get the texture right, or you'll throw it right back up. Yeah,
it's not pleasant. The texture's not pleasant. But so I asked him, and he was like, "Okay, I'm okay with you doing that." Because our concern was, you know, if it would actually put me into labor if I wasn't going to be in active labor. And they said, no, it's not going to start labor for sure unless she's actually in active labor.
They'll just give you like diarrhea or throw up because of the castor oil.
And that's what I had heard, that castor oil did that, but I was like, it'll be okay. Oh my gosh, I was so wrong.
It's awful. I've used castor oil with all 3 babies. And every time I'm like, I'll never do it again. Every time I get to like 41 weeks, I'm like, give me the castor oil.
So, you know, she gave me the brew. She checked me. She's like, you're still at an 8. You're still having contractions. This will put you into labor if you're still going to have the baby today. So I went home, took it, you know, took a nap, rested, and then basically it did put me into labor very quickly. It was like an hour or so, and my contractions never died down. They just got more intense. Then I put on some worship music and we went, you know, I was just really focused. My entire labor, I am not kidding you, which was like basically 2 hours of active labor. If you count it like from the morning, it was like a full day. But
like early labor.
Early labor. The active labor from when I really started taking the brew and I started like feeling the contractions more, they did not hurt. It only hurt when they had to check my cervix, and the reason they haven't had to keep checking it is because it was not flat, like it wasn't dilated.
You had a lip.
Yeah, I had a lip, and they did not want me to start pushing until I was a 10 because I tore so badly with my second baby. Now, like there's different viewpoints on that you can start pushing supposedly before you're at a 10, like it's just something that they've always done, I think, at midwifery as like a care thing. But they were adamant that they didn't want me to push before I was a 10, and I didn't feel like I needed to push. I just I wanted to be comfortable. I wanted to be in the water, and they had me do like roll. What do they call it? They had me do a technique with spinning babies, basically, where they wanted her to be. Or they wanted, sorry, it wasn't a girl, it was a boy, but at the time we thought maybe it was a girl. So we were saying her a lot. They wanted the baby to be face down, and he was face up. So they had me like doing different positions.
Like inversions to try and get,
like downward dog,
from to OP.
And then laying outside, laying with my leg up, and then repeating the cycle.
3 sisters is what it's called,
And that worked because he changed positions, and then they were like, okay, well, you know, we're going to get the water ready and you can get in. Because like basically I was almost ready to push, but I just didn't have the urge yet. So they were getting the water ready, and looking back at it, like looking at the footage, I was like, oh my gosh, they were literally expecting me to start pushing the baby out like very soon, because they had already gotten the water ready and I had told them I wanted a water birth. So I get in the bathtub. This time we had our bathroom completed in the bath.
So you didn't even mess with the birth pool?
No, we did not. We did not. No birth pool. I was like, oh, if I'm going to give birth with water, I might as well just use our bathtub because I had done it previously. So, you know, you can watch the video and literally see how calm I was the whole time.
I thought like watching that, I was like, she's like a 5 and you're like completely ready to push.
I was an 8, and when I got in the bathtub I was a 9.
Wow.
And that's when they started being pretty intense and I couldn't talk through that. And then they were discussing breaking my water because my cervix started to swell on one side, and they were going to either do lobelia, or which is like it's a tincture that they put directly on your cervix, or an oil or something.
Is it like a homeopathy?
It's a homeopathy, but it causes you to dilate, but it can slow down contractions.
Okay.
And my cervix basically was starting to swell up and close off.
Okay.
And they were like, once you like, if it closes off anymore, it's going to be a downward hill from here, and you're going to be in labor a very long time if that happens. But they were like, but you're almost there. Like, your body's literally trying to get the baby out.
Yeah.
And so they were like, well, you can choose to do the lobelia, or I can break your water, or during every contraction, I can have my hand in and hold it open. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Because it was so painful when they would have their hand in, and it was fine otherwise. I didn't even feel like a contraction basically. But like, you know, it's a sensitive part of your body and it's stretching a lot. So to have a hand on there is not pleasant. I do not recommend.
No, it's awful.
And so I was like, okay, well, and Roberta was trying to get the girls to go to sleep.
Yes,
and
I remember that from your video. He was in and out, the girls were in and out. I was like, this feels a little chaotic.
It was a little chaotic.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I so wanted them to be there.
Yeah.
And I had it in my mind that they needed to be there, but they really didn't. You know, like they could have gone with my mother-in-law and they would have been fine. It's just I wanted the experience of them being there with me. But I think a lot of the times when women do that, their children are older.
I think so too, because when I had both of mine at home, my kids were there, and I had, you know, my mom there to take care of them. And it happened both times when they were asleep. So like they didn't even,
and that's what happened.
They woke up to a new baby.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's what happened with Addie. Bethany was asleep, and when I pushed her out, she woke up.
Yeah.
Which I forgot to mention earlier, but she got to see her sister right away.
That's sweet.
So I wanted that same experience,
Yeah.
but I was thinking they'll be asleep. Like surely they'll be asleep, and they weren't. And so that was a little bit rough.
What time was it?
So by this point, it was right before. It was like 7:30,
Okay.
7:45.
Like right around that time.
Yeah, they were getting tired. And so he was trying to put them to sleep, and then the midwife told me that, you know, the 3 options, and I was like, okay, well, I need to talk to my husband, because I didn't want my water broken, but it seemed like that would be the only good option.
Like the easiest option.
Yeah. And so I told him, and he was like, no, I don't want them to break the water. And he was like, and I don't feel good about the other options either. And he was like, okay, well, he was like, let's pray. So he lays his hand on my belly.
Yeah.
You can see it in the video.
This is the coolest part of the whole video.
He literally whispers, break, in Jesus' name, to my water. And I felt it break.
Mm-hmm.
And it had happened to me previously, so I knew what it felt like underwater, you know, with my second baby. But I wasn't pushing or anything. It literally spontaneously broke because God made it break. And I was like, it broke. You know, the only indication that it had broken is that I looked up at him in the video. And he was like, are you sure? And I was like, yes, I felt something. I felt a little pop. And so he runs out to get he sent my photographer to go get the midwives, and she went out and got them, and she was like, her water broke, you know, they all come running back in. My midwife checks me, and she's like, no, you didn't break, I can still feel it. Well, she removed her hand, and she's like, so what do you want to do? And right when she took her hand out, the rest of it broke.
Yeah.
Because what had happened is it had torn. And then when she took her hand out, it literally split all the way open, because then I felt the release of the water come out. That's when my contractions got very, very intense very quickly, because I started experiencing the diarrhea type cramping that the castor oil causes. So then I felt like I needed to go to the bathroom, and I had to get out of the water to get on the toilet. And then I got, you know, I went to the bathroom. It was horrible, horrible, horrible. It was worse than like just the natural, like my body.
Well, because your body will like naturally cleanse itself out.
Yeah, which is
right
before.
before. But then when you have the castor oil, it's a whole new level.
Yes.
It's a whole new level.
It was so bad.
It's so bad.
It makes your stomach hurt so bad. And you don't feel like you can stop.
And then you almost deal with like dehydration type symptoms sometimes if it's really bad or goes on for a while. Yeah.
So
I just don't recommend castor oil.
No, I probably wouldn't do it again either. And so went through all of that, and then finally felt like, okay, I can get back in the water, because I knew I couldn't go to the bathroom in the water, like, because I was going to give birth there. Yeah. But I literally, like, you don't care when you're about to have a baby. You literally don't care about any of that stuff. Like, women that are like, will I poop? You know, it doesn't matter.
Think about it in the moment.
And so finally got in the water again, and then felt like I needed to get out again to go to the bathroom. And I was like, this is miserable. Like, I'm going to be feeling like I have to poop like every 30 seconds. Like, how am I going to get birth in the bathtub? The other thing was I had to be on my side. And they were telling me you can't be in the bathtub unless you lay on your side and hike your leg up. And I couldn't get my
Because we were trying to get the cervical lift to go away.
And they were trying to get me to dilate fully to 10. And right at that point, I was like, I feel like I have to push. I need to push. Can I push? And they were going to check me. And they're like, where do you want to have the baby? If you're not having contraction right now, you either need to be on the bed or you need to be on the, like on side lane. So I chose the bed. And then we got into pushing. So we moved to the bed, and immediately they checked me and they're like, okay, you're complete. You can start pushing. So immediately it was just like, I just let my body do whatever I was gonna do. And at this point though, it was like, once I was in the bathtub and in and out, is when I started to experience like the panic of I wouldn't be able to have my baby the way I wanted to, because I wanted to have him in the bathtub.
Yeah.
And when it fully set in that I wasn't going to be able to, and they put me in a side lie position, I was like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how it was with my first, and I kept equating it to my first birth. And that's like the mistake that I made. I started getting scared. Yeah. And so the first 15 minutes after my water broke, they weren't painful, but it was very intense. And then once I was pushing and on the bed, it was very painful. So the last 15 minutes was not supernatural like I wanted it to be, but the rest of it really was. And so finally, pushed him out, and they held my perineum in order to keep me from tearing.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I felt like it's different giving birth laying down than it is sitting up or standing up, because you feel like you're pushing against a resistance, and the baby kind of moves
because you have gravity working against you. Yeah.
And I needed to be in that position to kind of help my body not to tear, and to keep my cervix from, like, it was slipping back in a weird way on his head, and so I had to be in that position. But once I got him out, everything was, fine. But the thing was, it was amazing. Like, the whole experience, I pushed him out, and we were like, what is it, And I saw he was a boy, and I started yelling, oh, it's a boy, it's a boy. And I was just so happy and so excited. And I was like, wow, that was amazing, So worth it not to know the gender, it gives you like that elation of,
it's like an extra, an extra high,
of oxytocin. And
did you tear?
No.
Okay.
I tore 0% with him at all. And it was honestly supernatural, because I didn't even feel like I had a baby. And that was so important, because right after I gave birth to him, I started hemorrhaging. And I wasn't hemorrhaging quite right after I had him, but my placenta was not coming loose. Yeah. And they ended up needing to do a manual extraction of my placenta, because when they went to kind of do tension on the cord to see if it would come out, this cord snapped and went inside me.
Okay.
And my midwife said it was like the most bizarre thing she's ever seen a cord do. And they immediately
had to go in and retrieve it.
Okay, it's go time, let's get it out. And they had to retrieve it, and it was very, very painful. Way worse than my first birth. Like, it was very excruciating. Yeah. And there's no pain meds for that, if you're having home birth. So then there was the risk of having infection because of, hands being introduced into your uterus, and you're bleeding and all this stuff.
It's an open wound, and you just gave birth. Yeah.
And they literally tear it off with your uterine wall. So that was not pleasant.
Wow.
I remember, like, my in-laws were there, and they were like, why are you screaming like that? And I was like, oh my gosh. Like,
because it was an emergency.
It was an emergency. And I started bleeding pretty heavily right after they got it out, because of the way that it had to come out. And because my midwife had seen what had happened with my water breaking, because my husband told it to, she was like, okay, Roberto, command the bleeding to stop, because she had already given me a shot of Pitocin, and she gave me a pill, which I don't remember.
Cytotec.
Yeah, Cytotec. And it didn't work.
Okay.
And so he commanded it to stop, and it stopped.
Wow.
And then, so we got through that whole ordeal, and then Gabriel wasn't really crying. He was like crying on and off, and then he would try to latch, and he would just kind of like grunt. Yeah. And he wasn't coughing, and he wasn't really crying. And he seemed to be struggling a little bit. And so we kept asking my midwife, like, is he okay? Like what's going on? Because with we had 2 previous babies, and we knew that they should cry, like, right away. And they kept like looking at him and checking his pulse, and then they held him upside down a few times just to see if it would help drain the fluid, and they were listening to his lungs, and they were like, something is up, but they weren't telling us because they were observing him. And my midwife was already pretty sure we were going to have to go in to the NICU, but she didn't tell me because she didn't want me to freak out, because I had just like almost hemorrhaged gone through what I did. And so about an hour after he was born, like, thank God I was able to hold him and do skin to skin like I wanted to in the golden hour. I'm so grateful that I got that, because at an hour in, she was like, okay, I have one more thing I can try. She's like, he's not quite crying the way he needs to clear his lungs. And he was having trouble transitioning is essentially what was happening. And so she's like, I have one more thing I can do, which is to just give him a warm bath. And she essentially put him under the water, like fully up to his neck. And Roberta was there with her when she was doing that. She's like, okay, well, he's responding well. And she would take him out, and he would do the whole thing again when he wasn't clearing his lungs and not breathing well. And his oxygen levels were tanking really fast at that point. He was starting to become very white. And she just told him, he's not improving and he's not responding the way I need him to, so we're probably going to have to transport him to the NICU. And they came back in, they gave it a little bit more time, like they stretched it as long as they possibly could to see if he would respond, and he wasn't. And I remember them just telling me, like they had prepped me, and I was like, I was still thinking like, oh, it's going to be okay. Yeah. Like it has to be okay.
He'll pick up, he'll cry, it'll be fine.
Yeah. And he wouldn't latch. He couldn't latch because he was so focused on breathing. But then he started retracting around his rib cage. Yeah. And she was like, okay, like we have to make the call. Like we have to go into the NICU. And it was so hard. Like I felt like everything that I believed for literally went out the window. And I was like, I couldn't even process what was happening, you know? And they were like, so do you want Roberto to go in the ambulance with him and you stay here and rest at home? And then maybe you could go tomorrow and see him. Or do you want to go with him in the ambulance and then Roberto follow? Because they didn't want to put him in the car seat due to the restriction on the chest. And I was like, man, I just had a baby. Like, I don't want to be sitting up in a hospital in comfortable seat or in a wheelchair and not be able to move. And, you know, I was like, but even with Roberta there, like, I don't think I can handle that. Because I knew what it was like postpartum after 2 babies. And they were like, you didn't tear. Like, thank God you did not tear. And I was like, okay. And then I just made up my mind. I was like, I do not want to be separated from him. I'm going with him. And I'm just going to suck it up, like, even if it's hard, you know. And so they got there. It was so weird. Like, that precious space that a birth space is, having...
It's like sacred.
Yes.
Yeah.
Having 6 grown dudes, like firemen coming into your house, into your birth space where you just had a baby, and realizing this is the end of it, you know. And it was hard for me to, I guess, take the postpartum period and really, like, the first week. Like, I love the first week because I just lay in bed with my baby and I recover and I nurse, and I didn't get that. And I grieved losing that. However, God put something so special in it, in that He allowed me not to tear. And I did not feel like I could have a baby. I literally was up walking around the hospital within like an hour of giving birth.
I remember seeing you on your stories and everything. I was like, how did she just have a baby? Because I couldn't walk. Like, I didn't get out of bed for 5 days.
It was
I just rested.
not
like, I couldn't.
It was not.
It was amazing. I was like, what a miracle.
I know. And I was here decorating like a couple days after he was born, because he was over in the NICU down the street. Yeah. And I'm so grateful that God allowed me to like supernaturally recover. I was just a tiny bit sore where they had taken my placenta on the right side. And then a few days after I had him, I started feeling some swelling and some discomfort. Like, I was having incredible amounts of cramping, even when I was nursing or pumping, because he wasn't eating. He was in the NICU. Yeah. We couldn't hold him as much as we wanted to, and I couldn't nurse him. So I was pumping, but in between pumping, I was having horrible after pains that wouldn't stop. They were so bad that Roberta was pushing on my back really, really hard.
Like counter pressure
to get rid of the pain, and it wasn't working. And I was taking ibuprofen, and I could feel it through. Yeah. And it wasn't improving. And so went to my doctor. He got me on antibiotics really quick, because he was like, yeah, with like it wasn't a sterile environment, and they had to put their hands in your uterus. And he's like, just to be safe, let's get you on antibiotics. And it was starting to turn into an infection. Thank God I didn't even need a DNC or anything. Good. And so there were threads of goodness throughout that whole week. You know, he even got jaundice. And I remember being like 3 days in, we had no idea when he was going to come home. And we had gone home to rest in between, you know, being at the hospital the whole time. And while we, you know, we missed our girls so much. We weren't home when we got home, you know, just the normal everyday things were gone, and I wasn't pregnant. And so it was just like the grief of all of that was so hard to deal with. And we got home and I went to the room. It was like the second night we had gone home to rest, and I was just sat on my toddler's bed and I just started sobbing. And I was like, I miss them so much, and I can't deal with it. Like I was like, Roberto, I'm here and my children are not here with me, you know. And that was like the hardest moment of my life. And I was grateful that, number one, he was alive. Because he turned so white in the ambulance on the way there, and he was losing oxygen. They put him on a CPAP machine at 100% oxygen right when we got there. And the thing was, it was the days that followed my birth were absolutely nothing short of miraculous. The thing with my placenta, the thing with his oxygen levels, and then the thing with there was another thing I can't remember right now, but everything that happened, it immediately turned around. Like there were people praying for him immediately. Like we sent out a text message to everybody that we knew who would actually believe with us and not speak down into the situation. We didn't even tell people he had been born.
I didn't even know. I only knew because I messaged you and then you said you were in the hospital, and I remember calling my mom and I was like, we need to pray for Brittany now. I was like, I don't know what's going on. I'm not going to bother her, but it's not ideal. So
it was really,
I remember
really
that.
Scary. But a lot of people prayed, and there is power in prayer. There's power in the name of Jesus. And things started turning around immediately. He was down to like 21% oxygen the next morning on the CPAP machine, and he was tolerating it well and keeping, you know, his oxygen levels up. And so they slowly weaned him off of everything. But that night when I was home, I was like, babe, I feel like the enemy has stolen so much from me. Because this was supposed to be absolutely supernatural, like it was with my second.
Like the perfect birth,
like the perfect, you know. And what do I have? I have nothing to show for it, is how I felt. Obviously, I did have things to show for it. And he was like, I know, babe, I miss them too. Yeah. I wish they were here with us too. And I just sobbed my heart out. Then we went to sleep. And I went to sleep without letting my sinuses drain, so I woke up with the puffiest eyes in the world. It looked like I'd gotten punched in my face, minus the bruises. And I woke up in the morning, and that had happened at midnight, and then I woke up and I looked at my YouTube subscription list. And I kind of scrolled through, and there was a post, like a community tab post from a girl that I follow, and she had written in there at the exact moment when I let those words out of my mouth that I feel like the enemy has stolen so much from me. She posted this on her thing, and it said, "It's time to stand up and take back what the enemy has stolen from you." And I was like, oh, babe, this was for me. Like I literally said this at the same moment. So I got up and I prayed, and I said, devil, you get your hands off of my son. You cannot have him. And I said, you better watch out, because his name is Gabriel Elias. Absolutely. Which means my God is my own. And he was an angel in the Bible, so you better watch out. And I took back my stand as a mom, and I took my authority, and I told the devil to get his hands off of him. And so that was the day that everything turned around, for sure. Like we knew when he was gonna come home at that point. He came home like a day and a half later, and they had actually told us like it's looking really good. It's gonna go home within the next 2 days. And I was so grateful. Well, then I got home and I was like, well, you know, like I spent the first 5 days of my baby's life in the hospital. You know, and I was thinking, how can I even share this with people? And then God told me, look for the good that was within your story. And look for the threads of goodness that I put there for you. And I was like, okay, well, what were they? And I started like listing them off, and I was like, this is incredible. Like I literally stopped bleeding from the birth itself within like 10 days.
That's amazing.
And I didn't feel like I had a baby. I had all of my energy. I was sleeping great. My milk came in while we were in the hospital. I was able to give him a bottle of my own milk. Like I didn't want to do formula. I didn't have to supplement. And it's like unheard of in the NICU for so early. It is. And he was born at 37 weeks. And so like there was literally no complications with nursing. I nursed him while I was there. He gained weight super fast once we were, you know, he was I guess getting fed through the what do they call it? The NG tube. And then he took a bottle really well. He nursed really well. It was as if nothing had happened.
Yeah.
And he's never had any complications with breathing at all since then. And then the other thing I was going to say, which I always forget to mention this at the beginning, is that I was GBS positive.
Okay.
And that's the reason why my midwife thought that that's what it was, when he was having trouble breathing.
Okay. Because you didn't do antibiotics when they were.
No.
And you know, it's like a 0.1% chance that your baby could get an infection. I mean, it's so incredibly low that could even happen. But when it does, it's bad.
So that's what we were waiting for. That
yeah.
week, we were waiting for results back on that. And 3 days in, they said it was negative. Thank you.
So it wasn't even that?
It wasn't that.
Wow.
It was literally, what we think was the deal is that he was born slightly early.
Yeah.
Very slightly, like a week maybe.
And just had a hard time.
And had a hard time transitioning because he was a boy. And that's it. Like, there was literally no other reason for him to have been struggling.
Wow.
And honestly, I'm not one to say, I think the devil's attacking me. But that whole week was literally like hit after hit after hit. There were things behind the scenes happening in our business. There were things behind the scenes, like,
your camera.
With my camera. And then our car had died, like, before that record. So it just recorded that whole
Okay.
Okay. We should be good now.
You're fine. I'll just hit. You just go.
Okay, remind me what was the last thing I said.
I can't even remember. You were just saying looking for the good, and whenever you posted it, it went viral. And you said all the whole last year, the Lord was leading to it.
So I guess the main takeaway for me for this whole last year is the importance of listening to what the Holy Spirit tells you to do. And I am so, so grateful that I have my son here with me, and he is good. You know, he's healthy.
He's beautiful.
He's
like
so big now.
So cute.
He's only 3 months old, and he's in 6 months clothing. He's so chunky, you know, and like that is not a normal progression of events.
No.
You know, normally there's problems feeding or problems nursing. He even has tongue ties, and it's like he doesn't have them because he eats so well, and it's just fascinating to me. And so, anyways, I guess the takeaway from me is how good God is, and how He will take things that are maybe not good, and He'll turn them for the good of those who love Him, and just His faithfulness. You know, I'm just so grateful. I'm so overwhelmed by it. And who would have thought, like 4 years ago, when I was pregnant with Bethany at this very moment, that I would experience everything that I've had simply because I chose to believe His promises. You have to choose to believe it. You have to put your mind in the space that you're going to accept it. It's a free gift that God gives every woman who chooses to accept it. Just like you can choose to accept salvation from Jesus or reject it. You can choose to accept healing or reject it. And you can choose to accept that women can have babies without pain or reject it.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. It's not, I'm not a unicorn. This can happen to anybody who believes for it. And I'm really passionate about it. I even started a Facebook group, which we'll also link down below.
Yes, absolutely.
For moms that are believing to either have babies one day of their own supernaturally, or just have a supernatural birth. It's a very simple name. It's just motherhood, homemaking, and supernatural childbirth. And I believe you can have supernatural childbirth whether you have a baby at home or in a hospital. Absolutely. It doesn't need to be at home.
Well, because Jackie Mize didn't have her babies at home. They were all in the hospital.
Yeah, and at clinics. And that was it. Like, she experienced absolutely pain-free birth and absolutely supernatural births. And so, if you're believing for that, I want to tell you that you can absolutely have that happen for you too.
Okay, so for moms, just real quick to wrap this up, for moms who are pregnant or who maybe aren't pregnant and thinking that they want a supernatural childbirth, what is like 1 or 2 top tips that you would encourage them to start?
Yes, so that's a really good question. I would say read the book, Supernatural Childbirth by Jackie Mize. Go through it and really eat it. You know, like really let it digest in your spirit. Don't go through it, flying through it. And then the other thing I would say is you need to leave no room for doubts in your mind. You need to do work preparing your mind and your heart for giving birth. It's not something that's just going to happen if you just say, oh, it's going to happen, like with Bethany. I just believed it would happen, but I didn't really meditate on it, and I let other people's doubts get to me, and it didn't happen. So I believed it in a sense, but I didn't really believe it in my heart, because in my heart were all those doubts. Like, could it really happen for me, Lord? You know, everybody's telling me that it's not going to happen. So those are the main things I would say. And then be very careful with who you tell you're believing.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
Believing for this, tell people that either have experienced it, because it's more commonplace, I feel, than it used to be for women to have babies.
I never had heard of it 4 years ago, but the last 2 years now, it's like every person I talk to is mentioning pain-free birth, supernatural childbirth, something along those lines.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just be careful who you tell and get in your spirit. And if you can get your husband on the same page, that is huge. I'm going to be making a video soon with my husband about that in particular, like how do you guys get on the same page for birth? What do you do if your husband, like for example, if you want to have a home birth and your husband doesn't want you to? Like giving the perspective of Roberto, because he did not want me to have a home birth. And
that's why I'm doing an interview with James about this same thing soon too. Because he was just saying he was against home birth. He was like, this isn't safe, you're gonna die. And then we watched The Business of Being Born, and we interviewed my midwife, and he was like, now he tries to talk other women out of having babies in the hospital. He's like, why are you going to the hospital? You shouldn't be
I love it. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Yeah. So well, with husbands, the thing is, like, they just want to protect you.
Exactly.
They just want to stay the snake, and so that documentary is really good if you're looking into having a home birth. But nobody can make the decision for you. If you choose to do it, then we will believe with you.
Yes.
But you have to first decide. It's not something that we can encourage you, but it's not 100% guaranteed unless you really.
You have to make that decision and put in the work. You can't just say, well, I'm going to have this and that's that. It's like with anything, practice makes perfect. So you have to believe it, meditate. The book is also on Audible. So if you have an Audible subscription, it's free. And so you can just listen to it on there.
Yes.
And I always recommend when people ask me, listen to it and read it. Like do both. Like I never had read that book until my third baby, and I listened to it in the car while I was driving, and then I read it at home afterwards. And I did not have supernatural birth by any means. Like it was painful. However, the pain was like non-existent with my third one until transition. Whereas before I never had that. And I was like, this is different. So I'm really excited, especially after hearing your interviews. I'm like, I'm going to do this for my next one, but I probably won't tell anybody. Because it's, people's doubts and negativities get in your mind. So I love that you said be very careful and selective with who you share that with.
Absolutely. So there's not very many people believe in the supernatural. That's just the thing, and it's the same with healing, and it's the same with other things in the church. But particularly with birth, it's such a sacred thing, and it's so special. Like, don't cast your pearls before swine. That's what the Bible says. Don't cast it out there just for anybody to tell you their own opinions and give you their horror stories, So those are the two things. And then the third thing I would say is join my group. I am very active in there, helping women figure out how to have how to believe for a supernatural birth. I'm going to be writing a book soon. I'm going to start on it.
Love it.
I've just been like, Holy Spirit, like, how do you want me to write this book? Because there's so much, and write an updated, basically, version of supernatural childbirth is what He's put on my heart, but kind of like my experience and how I started to believe for it. And then something else I would say is like listening to it, audio, is super important. Listen to the book and there's a section in the book where it says, like confessions and verses, Bible verses. There's a section in the chapters of the book, and you can listen to that on repeat, and really put your mind in the space where you, almost as if you're imagining your birth happening. So something that I would recommend is that if you're having a home birth or wherever you're planning to have your birth, get into a bathtub and like put on those audio scriptures and listen to them. You can even listen to Miriam's that she released.
Yes, and my own audio collection, which I'll link it as well.
Yes.
So
and literally let that get into your spirit, into your mind. Calm down. Like do it as a routine. Like you take a relaxing bath. You imagine your birth as you're listening to this, and let it get into your mind. And then when you're in labor, get into the bathtub if you can. It's not always possible, or take a shower. Get into the mind space and do the same exact things that you do throughout your pregnancy.
It's like routine.
It's routine. And your body's immediately going to relax. It's immediately going to go to the positive thoughts that you were having before you had your babies. And it's a psychological thing, but it gets it into your subconscious mind. And so your body's going to do what you told it to do. You You literally I made an audio recording on my phone before I had Gabriel of everything I wanted my body to do, including clearing up the yeast infection that I had.
Yes.
And I told my cervix to dilate before I was in labor. I told it to be face completely and fully, and it did. I told it, I literally detailed so many different things of how I wanted my birth to go, and it happened. And I literally have it still on my phone, but I could listen to myself saying it.
I love that.
So those are the main, I guess, 4 things.
I did that too with Rory. I was not as detailed, and I think it's hard because you don't know how detailed. But what's so sweet is that the Lord listens and He knows the desires of your heart, right? And so every single thing that you care about, He cares about.
He does.
He really does.
Yeah.
But when it comes to our birth and these big things, it's like, well, does He really care about that?
Yeah.
And He does.
Yeah.
Because I wanted 6 hours or less of labor. I didn't want to tear. I wanted to be able to push in any position I wanted. I wanted a baby girl, and I didn't know. And there were like 2 or 3 other things, but I got every single thing that I prayed for and believed for, and I was like, how special is that? Like, He cares so much.
He does.
It's just amazing.
He does.
Well, before we go, can you share with everyone where they can find you?
Yes.
Like on YouTube, Instagram?
So on Instagram, my @ is a lovely masterpiece of a life. And on YouTube, it's Brittany Garcia, then the line up, but you can just write it out. Brittany Garcia, a lovely masterpiece of a life on YouTube. And then on TikTok, I believe my name is @Brittany Garcia. I'll send you all the one that gives too many characters for the thing. And then you can also my group if you want to join and join other like-minded mamas. It's kind of lonely in the motherhood season and kind of lonely in the whole supernatural births, I guess, section. You can join other moms that are also believing for other supernatural births. So I'll send you all of that. So you can put it down
we'll
below.
have a long link of show notes, lots of links for you.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you want to share?
I just want to say that God meets you where your faith is at, and it's something that it's not that you have to build your faith, because I believe He does give us supernatural faith for the moment that we need it. But I would say if you have if you're pregnant and you have a headache, believe for Him to take that headache away from you, because if you can believe Him to heal you of that, you can absolutely believe Him to give you a supernatural birth. And it's not that if it doesn't happen, it's not going to happen in your birth. I'm just saying, take little instances of healing or taking away pain in little tiny sections of your life and give it to Him, and start letting Him lead you that way and listen to His voice, and it's going to happen. I'm so excited to hear all the testimonies that are going to come from this.
I love it. Oh, well, thank you so much. Yay.
Everything worked?
I think so. Yay. Watch it have not recorded any audio.